There is a version of Irish history that fits neatly on a tourist plaque. High kings ruling from a hill in Meath. Ancient clans with tidy family trees. Surnames handed down like heirlooms, each one a clean, unbroken line back to a single legendary founder. It is a good story. It is also, geneticists are now finding, only partly true. Because when researchers began testing the Y chromosomes of men carrying certain rare Irish surnames, names long associated with service to the old royal dynasties, they were not simply confirming folklore. They were uncovering something the folklore never mentioned. A history written not in the annals, but in the blood itself. And what it shows is stranger, older, and far more human than descended from a king. For over 1,000 years, Ireland operated under a system almost unrecognizable to modern eyes. There was no single unified crown. Instead, the island was divided among competing dynasties, each ruling a shifting territory, each claiming descent from a founding ancestor whose name would eventually become the surname of thousands. Above them, at least in theory, sat the High King at Tara, a title that was as much symbolic as absolute, contested constantly, rarely commanding real obedience from every corner of the island. Beneath these ruling dynasties sat something just as important to this story, the hereditary service families. Brehons who interpreted law, Alums who preserved poetry and genealogy through memorized verse, stewards, physicians, harpists, and military commanders whose families served a particular ruling house for generation after generation, often taking a surname that marked not blood descent from the king, but function, the poet's family, the steward's family, the marshal's family. This is the accepted story most people know. Kings at the top, service families below them. Surnames as a kind of ancient job title, fossilized into a name and carried down through the centuries. It seemed reasonable. It seemed, for a long time, settled. Then genealogists started noticing something that did not sit comfortably inside that framework. Historical records for early medieval Ireland are thin, scattered, and frequently self-serving. Many of the surviving genealogies were compiled by the very families they describe, centuries after the events they claim to record. A dynasty scribe had every incentive to draw a straight, flattering line back to a heroic founder, whether or not the biological reality supported it. Historians had long suspected that some of these genealogies were, quite simply, invented or embellished to justify a family's claim to land and status. But suspicion is not proof. For centuries, there was no way to actually test whether a surname's proud royal or noble origin story was fact or convenient fiction. That gap, between what the old manuscripts claimed and what could actually be verified, is where genetics finally entered the story. The tool that changed everything was the Y chromosome, the piece of DNA passed almost unchanged from father to son to grandson across generations. Because Irish and Scottish Gaelic surnames traditionally followed the paternal line, the same line the Y chromosome travels, researchers realized they had, for the first time, a way to test centuries-old genealogical claims against a piece of biological evidence no scribe could have faked. If a surname's founding story was accurate, men who carried that surname today should share a distinctive, traceable genetic signature. If it was not, the signature should scatter, unrelated men, unrelated ancestors, joined only by a shared name and nothing biological beneath it. Researchers began systematically sampling men with surnames tied to Ireland's old ruling and service lineages, comparing their Y chromosome markers for shared ancestry. In several cases, the results were remarkable. Certain rare surnames showed an extraordinarily high rate of shared paternal ancestry, far beyond anything random chance could explain, pointing toward a single dominant founding lineage that had multiplied across centuries, exactly as the old genealogies claimed. That was not the twist. That was the first confirmation. The twist was what happened when researchers looked closer and wider, because the same studies revealed that other supposedly royal or noble surnames splintered under genetic testing. The same name carried by 2, 3, sometimes 4 separate paternal lines with no shared ancestry between them at all. Same surname, same historical territory, completely different biological roots. That was not a contradiction. It was a signal, and it forced a more careful, layered explanation than true or false. One explanation lay in the very structure of hereditary service. A skilled harpist, physician, or Brehon without a son of his own could formally adopt a successor and pass on both the family trade and the surname, a transfer of profession and identity with no biological inheritance involved at all. Over centuries, that kind of professional adoption would quietly insert unrelated men into what looked, on paper, like a single unbroken bloodline. A second explanation was fosterage, a practice central to Gaelic society, in which sons of allied or subordinate families were raised within a more powerful household, sometimes taking on that household's name and loyalty without sharing its ancestry. A third, quieter explanation was the same one that surfaces in nearly every deep genetic surname study. Non-paternity events, scattered thinly across 1,000 years, each one small, each one invisible in any single generation, but compounding steadily over time into a measurable genetic fracture beneath a name that looked, from the outside, perfectly continuous. If this kind of science meets history investigation interests you, it's worth sticking around, because the most striking finding in this entire body of research involves not a service family, but a dynasty most people assume they already understand. The most influential study in this field expanded far beyond individual surname samples. Researchers compared Y chromosome data across a broad panel of Irish and Scottish men, cross-referencing rare, distinctive markers against medieval genealogies that claim descent from named early historical figures. This is where the evidence moved from suggestive to genuinely striking. One particular genetic signature, associated with a powerful early medieval dynasty whose descendants spread widely across the north of Ireland, turned up at a frequency among modern men carrying related surnames that researchers estimated was consistent with a single, remarkably successful male ancestor living roughly in the early medieval period. A man whose historical reputation, fittingly, was as the founder of one of Ireland's most expansive ruling lines. That much lined up with the old story almost perfectly. What did not line up was where else that same signature turned up. Because when researchers widened the comparison further, that same rare marker did not stay confined to the expected royal surnames. It appeared, in smaller but still meaningful numbers, in surnames belonging to families with no recorded genealogical connection to that dynasty at all, hereditary service families, minor local septs, names with no analytic claim to royal blood whatsoever. Not through error in the data, through the undocumented reality of medieval life, alliance, fosterage, informal adoption into a ruling household, and centuries of quiet human relationships no scribe thought worth recording. Not the confirmation researchers expected, not even the boundary they expected. The genome was not simply validating the old family trees written by medieval genealogists. It was revealing a wider, messier, and far more interconnected network sitting just beneath them, one where royal, common, and service bloodlines had been quietly mixing for centuries behind names designed to keep them looking separate. This matters for more than 15 rare surnames on a list. It cuts against something people instinctively want from ancestry, a clean, singular thread connecting them backward through time to one defining origin. What the Y chromosome data actually shows is closer to a braid than a rope. Dominant lineages did spread, sometimes dramatically, through genuine biological success. But they were constantly being joined, diluted, and reshaped by adoption, fosterage, service, and the ordinary unpredictability of human lives, over and over, for 1,000 years, in ways no medieval scribe had any incentive to record honestly. Picture the world where this all began. Low green hills rolling toward a horizon broken by ring forts and the smoke of hearth fires. A hall built on a mound, a poet reciting a genealogy from memory before an assembled court, weaving fact and flattery into a single unbroken sounding line. Somewhere beyond the hall, in a household with no name recorded anywhere, a boy is being fostered into a family that is not his own by blood, and in doing so, is about to become, 1,000 years later, one more thread in a genetic signal researchers will find scattered across Ireland, Scotland, and the wider world, with no idea how it got there. That is, the strange privilege genetics offers descendants today. It cannot always tell you which version of the old story is true. but it can tell you, with real precision, that the true story was almost always more complicated and more deeply, quietly connected than the version written down for the people in power. Subscribe if you want more stories where the evidence rewrites the map, because Ireland's history, it turns out, was never as simply divided as its surnames suggest. What the genetics of these 15 surnames ultimately offers is not a debunking of Irish genealogical tradition, and not a simple confirmation of it either. It is something more honest than
both. The old annals were not lies so much as incomplete memories, shaped by the political needs of the families who preserved them. The DNA does not erase those memories. It sits beside them, sometimes vindicating a claim that sounded too grand to be real, sometimes quietly correcting it, and sometimes opening a door onto a connection no manuscript ever thought to record. 15 surnames. 15 small threads pulled from a much larger, much older weave of service, kinship, adoption, and quiet human choices made by people who left almost nothing behind except a name and, unknowingly, a molecule. The old story said, "Your ancestor served a king, and that service defined your line forever." The genome suggests something larger and stranger, that the line was never as sealed as anyone believed, that royal and common blood mixed far more freely than the manuscripts admit, and that somewhere behind every one of these 15 names sits not a single clean answer, but a deep, layered, unfinished history still being read for the first time, one Y chromosome at a time.